My stepfather called me deadweight the same night I came home from burying Miriam. My half-brother nodded along, like it was the most reasonable thing he'd heard all week. My mother looked at her hands. None of them knew what that woman had left behind with my name on it. None of them had the faintest idea that the investment firm quietly managing my half-brother's retirement account now had my signature on the ownership papers. They thought I was unemployed, broke, and finally cornered. They were wrong, and I let them believe it just long enough. The drive back from Memphis had taken 4 hours. I'd held it together through the entire service, through the graveside prayer, the handshakes, the casseroles, the polite condolences from people who had known Miriam far longer than I had. I held it together through all of it. It was only when I pulled off I-40 into Nashville that my eyes finally stung. And I had to sit in a gas station parking lot for 15 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive again. Miriam Halcott had been 78 years old. She had no children, no husband, no siblings left. For 11 years, since I was 20 and desperate for any job that would keep me from moving back home. I had been her personal financial liaison. I managed her accounts, handled her property portfolio, took her to her cardiologist twice a month, and sat with her on Sunday evenings, watching whatever she'd recorded from Turner Classic. She paid me well. But more than the money, she treated me like I mattered. She once told me, "You are the first person in years who looks at me and sees a person instead of an inheritance." I told her I understood exactly what that felt like. I pulled into my mother's driveway just before 7. The lights were on. 3 cars I recognized. My half-brother's truck, his wife's silver SUV, my stepfather's Buick. The kind of lineup that means someone called a meeting and didn't tell you. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the dining room table had been set not for dinner, but for something that looked like a deposition. Papers stacked at one end, a yellow legal pad, a box of pens. My stepfather sat at the head, with his hands folded the way he always folded them, when he was about to tell me something I wouldn't like, but had already decided. My half-brother stood near the window in a collared shirt like he was presenting to a board. His wife perched on the arm of the couch, watching me with the particular attention of someone who has already made up her mind. My mother came from the kitchen, holding a dish towel. She didn't hug me. "Good, you made it," my stepfather said. "We figured this was as good a time as any." I'd driven 4 hours. I'd just buried the only person in my adult life who had looked at me without calculation, and I was being called to a meeting. "What kind of things?" I asked. My half-brother unfolded a paper. "Dad's house," he said. He'd started calling my biological father his father somewhere around middle school, and my mother had never corrected it. "We need to sort out what's happening with the property." My father had died 2 years earlier. He'd left behind a modest 3-bedroom in East Nashville, no mortgage, and a short handwritten will splitting things evenly between us. We'd never gotten around to formalizing it. I'd assumed, naively, I see now, that it would stay equal. "I've spoken with an attorney," my half-brother said, sliding the paper toward me. "Given that you haven't contributed to upkeep, and given your current situation, it makes more sense for the house to be transferred to my name. I have the stable income to maintain it properly." My current situation. I had just lost a part-time bookkeeping contract that week, a small office that closed down. Nothing dramatic. And somehow, the way these things travel through families, like weather, they already knew. "You've been between things before," his wife offered from the couch. "This way the house is protected." My mother twisted the dish towel in her hands. "I have an equal legal claim to that house," I said. My stepfather exhaled the way he always exhaled when I said something he considered beside the point. "Honey, you've been living in an old woman's spare bedroom for 2 years." I was her live-in financial manager. It was a professional arrangement. "Sounds like a maid situation to me," his wife said, not quite under her breath, to no one in particular. Nobody corrected her. I smiled. I sat down. I didn't say another word about it. Sitting through things was something I'd learned early. When I was 14, I found a summer science program at Vanderbilt. A week-long camp, not expensive. The kind of thing other kids got signed up for without even having to ask. I brought the brochure home and set it on the kitchen table. My stepfather looked at it the way you look at junk mail. "We're not paying for field trips," he said. "You want something, figure out how to earn it." So that summer, while kids I knew were in labs building circuits and presenting projects, I was stocking shelves at a grocery store off Charlotte Avenue, handing my paychecks to my mother for household expenses she said were shared responsibilities. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it would matter someday. What I didn't understand yet was that in some families, your sacrifice is never enough. It just displays the baseline of what they expect you to give next. Later that evening, they ordered pizza. My mother set a plate in front of me, like that settled something. My half-brother's wife talked about their upcoming trip to Portugal. She mentioned the hotel twice, making deliberate eye contact with me the second time. My stepfather made a toast to practicality and forward momentum, and my half-brother clinked his glass and said, "To the family moving forward together." I smiled. I nodded. I ate 2 slices and sat through all of it. What none of them saw was what I was carrying in my bag that night. Miriam's attorney had called me that morning, before I'd even gotten on the road. He walked me through the broad outline. The formal reading was scheduled for the following week, but the shape of it was already clear. The house in Memphis I'd helped her renovate. The firm, Halcott Properties and Management, of which she'd already transferred 40% ownership to me 3 years prior. And the remainder of her liquid estate, which came to just over $4.8 million. She had updated the documents 18 months ago. She had told no one except her attorney. I was not a maid. I was, as of that morning, the majority stakeholder in a firm with 14 commercial properties under management, and a client list that included, among others, my half-brother's retirement account. I didn't say any of that over pizza. The formal letter from his attorney arrived on a Tuesday. I was in the lobby of a hotel downtown. I'd booked a suite, not for the luxury of it, but because I needed space that was entirely my own. The letter was organized, itemized, and almost polite. It outlined that I had benefited from use of the decedent's property without formal compensation, and that, given my diminished earning capacity, the most equitable resolution would be for me to sign a deed transfer in exchange for a one-time payment of $14,000. $14,000. For half a house in East Nashville that Zillow was currently valuing at $460,000. I read it twice. Then I called my attorney. 2 days later, I got a bank notification on my phone. A transfer, $1,800. Out of an old joint savings account my mother and I had set up years ago so I could help her with utilities during a rough stretch. I hadn't touched that account in over a year. I logged in immediately and checked the IP address and the timestamp. Her home network. She hadn't asked. She hadn't texted. She had simply gone in and taken it, the way you take something you've always considered yours. I sat with that for a long time. It wasn't the money. It was what it confirmed. That to them, my generosity had never been received as love. It had been received as access. I locked the account and filed a dispute with the bank. Then came something I didn't expect. A woman I'd interviewed with 2 weeks earlier, a regional accounting firm, a senior analyst position I'd been shortlisted for, emailed to say the role had been filled. Standard rejection, nothing unusual. But the next morning my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. A man's voice, careful and apologetic, identifying himself as an HR coordinator. He'd called to leave a voicemail and hadn't fully disconnected. I could hear him in what seemed like a hallway, saying to someone else, "I know, but apparently she's in some kind of family legal dispute. The partner doesn't want the liability. We'll go with the other candidate." The call ended a second later. I sat very still. There were exactly 4 people who knew about the property dispute. Only one of them had anything to gain from making me unemployable. I opened my email and started typing. 4 days after that, a post appeared in the East Nashville Neighbors Facebook group. Anonymous account, but the details were specific. A description of a young woman with a history of taking advantage of elderly clients, allegedly manipulating her way into an estate, now contesting rightful ownership of her late father's home. An old photo of me from a work event, cropped, captioned with a question mark. Within 2 hours, it had 43 comments from strangers who had never met me and had already made their decisions. I recognized the writing immediately. My half-brother had always written in that particular tone, formal enough to sound credible, vague enough to stay untraceable. His wife had always had that edge of public cruelty that requires an audience. I put my phone face down and took a breath. Then, I went to work. The following week, I attended a meeting with a property management firm. I'd been considering contracting for the Nashville Halcott properties. The senior agent who took the meeting was cordial enough until I mentioned the scope of the portfolio. At which point he leaned back in his chair and said he'd need to see proof of ownership before going further down this road, in a tone that made clear he'd already assessed me and found me unconvincing. I handed him the ownership transfer documents, the LLC registration in my name, and Miriam's attorney's contact information. He studied the papers for almost 2 full minutes without speaking. When he looked up, his entire register had shifted. Suddenly very professional, very apologetic, suddenly offering me coffee. I told him I was fine. I signed the management agreement, and I walked out thinking about what Miriam used to say whenever someone underestimated her. She'd say it quietly, almost to herself. Let them. Just 2 words. Let them think what they want. Let them make their moves. Because the people busy underestimating you aren't watching what you're actually doing. And that, she said, is the only advantage you ever really need. My response to the attorney's letter was filed on a Thursday morning. 37 months of bank records showing my contributions to the property tax, insurance, and 2 major repairs. A full roof replacement and a new HVAC system, totaling $62,000. All traceable, none of it in my name on the deed. All of it provable. My defamation attorney sent a letter to the email address tied to the Facebook account, which had been registered, sloppily, in my half-brother's wife's name. The post disappeared within 6 hours. I sent a private message to my half-brother with 6 words. I have records. Stop now. Please. He sent a thumbs-up emoji. I posted publicly exactly once. My own page, which I'd barely touched in years. Just a statement. False accusations leave paper trails on both ends. Mine are in order. Attached were 3 documents. My employment contract with Halcott Properties, the ownership transfer signed by Miriam and her attorney, and a letter on law firm letterhead. No explanation. No dramatics. Then I had my attorney send a formal notice to Halcott's client management team. Due to a conflict of interest, my half-brother's retirement account should be transitioned to an independent advisor immediately, with full documentation of my ownership stake attached. His advisor called him the next morning. According to my friend Celia, who worked 2 floors above his office and had very thin walls to thank for this detail, my half-brother sat in his car in the parking garage for 45 minutes after that call. He had no idea. Not a guess. I drove to East Nashville that afternoon and sat outside my father's house for a while. I wasn't there to do anything. I just wanted to look at it. The maple tree we'd planted together when I was 8. The white porch railing he'd repainted 3 times because he could never get the shade quite right. The window in the 2nd bedroom where I used to read under the covers with a flashlight. My half-brother's truck was in the driveway. The curtains my father had picked out were still in the windows. I sat there until it got dark, then I drove back to my hotel. The probate court preliminary ruling came 2 weeks later. My documented financial contributions had been accepted as evidence of equitable interest. A court-appointed appraiser was scheduled. My half-brother could either buy out my share at fair market value or negotiate a shared resolution through his attorney. Never directly, never once directly, he chose to negotiate. What he didn't know was that 2 of the commercial properties now under my management through Halcott were 3 miles from his office, and one of them was the building where he leased his workspace. His renewal was coming up in 4 months. I had no intention of raising his rent or making things difficult. But knowing that his monthly check came through an account with my name on it, that his business address was in my tenant files, was a private justice that needed no audience, no announcement, no reaction from anyone else. My mother called on a Thursday evening. She didn't cry. She wasn't the crying type, and I'd stopped waiting for it a long time ago. She said, "I think things got out of hand." Things went exactly the direction everyone chose, I said. She was quiet. I could hear her television in the background. What are you going to do? She asked. I already did it, I said. I mailed her a card the next day. Plain white envelope, nothing printed on the outside. Inside was a check for 3 months of her utility bills and 2 sentences. This is from me to you, freely and without expectation. Please don't mistake it for an invitation to take more. I sealed it and walked it to the mailbox myself. I already knew she would cash it. I didn't need to watch. The settlement came through on a Wednesday. My half-brother would buy out my interest in the house at appraised value, minus my documented contributions. The net to me was $138,000. I deposited the check and didn't think about it again for several weeks. The anonymous Facebook account was eventually linked, through metadata, to my half-brother's wife's personal email. The defamation attorney's letter was sent. The account was deleted the same day. The neighborhood group's moderator posted a brief note about verifying identities before making public accusations. Someone liked it 7 times in a row. I still don't know who. I like to imagine it was my father. I bought a house in East Nashville 3 months later. Not my father's house, but 3 streets over, close enough to walk past the maple tree whenever I wanted to. I painted the kitchen yellow because Miriam always said yellow kitchens were the only ones worth cooking in. I got a library card. I started running in the mornings. I hired a property manager for the Halcott portfolio so I could take a few months without a calendar full of things I hadn't chosen. Celia brought wine over one evening and sat on my porch steps and said, "They genuinely had no idea, did they?" "Not a thing," I said. She shook her head slowly. "What did they think you did for 11 years? I thought about it. I think they thought I cleaned things. She laughed. I laughed too, though the thing underneath it wasn't quite laughter. It was something older and quieter, the particular sound of understanding something you should have let go of years ago, finally releasing it. My half-brother texted once, months later. No greeting, no context. Heard you own the Halcott portfolio. Congrats. That was the whole message. I read it and set my phone down and made a cup of tea. I thought about whether to respond for about 30 seconds. Then I decided I didn't need to. Some things don't require a reply. The truth doesn't need help landing. I drive past my father's house sometimes when I run. The new owners, my half-brother sold it 8 months after the settlement, faster than he let on, painted the porch railing a different color. Not the white my father kept repainting, but a kind of slate gray that's actually very nice. They kept the maple tree. I don't know them, but I'm glad they kept it. Mornings now are quiet in the way that used to feel impossible. Coffee before it gets cold. The specific angle of light through yellow kitchen cabinets. The neighbor's dog announcing the garbage truck. No voicemails I'm afraid to open. No one running calculations on what I owe for existing. No invoices for the crime of needing something once. I think about Miriam often. Not with grief anymore, exactly, but with the particular gratitude you feel for someone who saw who you were before you fully did. She handed me a stack of ownership documents 11 years ago and said, "Read every page before you sign. Understand what I'm giving you." I sat in her living room and read every word and asked every question, and at the end she smiled and said, "Good. Now you're prepared for whatever comes next." She was right, she usually was. Some losses can't be recovered, and some people won't change, and some families are what they are. Not through cruelty necessarily, but through a long habit of looking at you and seeing only what you can provide. I spent a long time trying to be worth more than that to people who'd already decided what I was worth. I don't do that anymore. Peace isn't a headline. It isn't a settlement check, or a judge's ruling, or a Facebook post that finally sets the record straight. It's quieter than all of that. It arrives slowly, like the particular quality of early morning light, without fanfare, without permission, and entirely on its own terms. That's where I am now. That's where I intend to stay.